Hi everyone, my name is Batuhan Çalık, and I will be presenting the Australian tropical savanna. My outline is, as you can see, is the introduction, and then I will be moving on with the climate, vegetation, and fauna, and then I will be talking about adaptations, and lastly, I will be talking about direct and indirect effects. As starting with introduction, the Australian savanna is a biome in the north of Australia, which is spread over the top of Australia. The biome includes the northern section of Western Australia, the Northern Territory, and higher parts of Queensland. It makes up 23% of Australia's land. Typically, it is very flat, with a landscape made up of small trees and shrubs that create a large open grassland. It has a tropical climate and sees a copious amount of rainfall in the wet season. The Australian tropical savanna has a total land area of more than 168 million hectares, and it includes 6 ecoregions. Also, there are tropical savannas in Africa, Asia, and South America. This is because they have tropical climates similar to Australia. Most of these areas in the north and close to the equator, but Australia is in the south, which means that the seasons are switched. We said that a savanna is usually very flat and with few trees and shrubs. This is because the fires destroy most of the trees and shrubs, which usually aren't fire resistant. This happens frequently during the summer. This is also because savannas across the world have a limited water supply and bigger vegetation, such as trees, are the first to die out. Most savannas are near the equator, but the Australian savanna is south of the equator, which causes this region to have summer while we are having fall. Savannas usually occur only in a climate that has both a rainy and dry season. Each of these different seasons is very extreme. And now we can talk about the climate, vegetation, and fauna of tropical savanna in Australia. In the summer period, the Australian savanna sees many monsoons that often drop heavily in quick bursts. This is when the areas receive the most rain. At other times of the year, there is very little rain and the land becomes arid and dry. Despite the change in rainfall, regardless of the time of year, it is pretty much hot all the time. The, the desert landscape regularly reaches over 50 degrees and barely drops below 30. Also, the fires in the tropical savanna areas are important for the regulation of the environment and the ecosystem. And because of the changing weather and the conditions around the ecosystem, the soil has layers, as we can see in the image. This climate graph shows average precipitations and temperature of the Australian savanna. The major trends are as followed. January had the highest precipitation of 437 millimeters of rain. July had the lowest, with on average only 1 millimeter of rain, with June close second at 2 millimeters. For average temperature, there is a four-way tie of 29 degrees Celsius between October, November, December, and April. The temperature stays at 28 degrees January through March. Then June through July, it stays at 25 degrees. This precipitation average can be a limiting factor for organisms because most of the rain is only in a 6-month period, making it hard to find water at other times of the year. It also makes the soil very dry, causing frequent wildfires. The dry seasons, or the dry, of the Australian savanna can last up to 5 months, from May to October. With each dry season come forest fires. These forest fires often occur often, and geographers believe that fire keeps the savanna healthy. The tropical rainforest trees that would have otherwise grown in that climate don't grow because they are destroyed by the fires. uh, Despite the fires don't destroy all of the underground grasses, the fires limit the growth of any vegetation that isn't fire resistant. Fortunately, the plants are able to bounce back from the common bushfires that erupt in these lands, and the ash helps the seeds in the soil to germinate, so the plants can grow again. Eucalyptus trees are quite robust and can survive anything but the worst fires. Usually the temperatures are cooler, with clear skies and low humidity. If we talk about the vegetation, the small plants are grasses and shrubs. There are many species of grass. Each is adapted to survive in different types of soil and the amount of seasonal rain they receive. They grow during the wet periods and become brown during the dry periods. They grow new green shoots from their base after the rain. For more information on the trees of the savanna are often small and spread out. Near weather courses, other species of trees grow much larger. Most of the trees are eucalyptus. Eucalypts remain green throughout the year and have their seeds in woody gum nuts. One of the larger trees in the baobab. It loses its leaves in the dry season. Tropical savannas can take many forms. They can be grasslands with few trees, or they can be woodlands with small or larger trees. There may also be patches of rainforest in places like deep gullies. Uh, for the fauna, we can say that marsupials dominate among the animals in this area. Marsupials are mammals whose young are born undeveloped. The premature marsupial baby spends most of its growing attached to the mother's nipple in a pouch. Marsupials are different from other mammals because they give birth to such undeveloped offspring, while other mammals' young are much more mature. The animals include echidna, eastern grey kangaroo, the koala agile, and whiptail wallabies, or the other examples on the screen. These animals live in or near the few trees in this area for shade, food, and water. In the other parts of the tropical savanna, the reptiles dominate. The saltwater crocodile, which is found here, is the world's largest reptile, and it can grow to be from 7 to 8 meters long. Some of the examples of the fauna, these are baobab trees, these are acacia trees, and as you can see, these are eucalyptus trees. And the animal examples are short-beaked echidna, eastern grey kangaroo, koalas, possums, the saltwater crocodile, and the whiptail wallaby. As we can talk about the animals and plants, we can talk about their adaptations to the environment too. If we start with plant adaptations, we can say that in summary they are drought tolerant, they have rhizomes, and they have defensive chemicals. The extreme differences in precipitation throughout the year is very stressful for plants, and as not only do they have to be drought tolerant, but also be able to survive the possibility of too much water once the weather season comes around. Dealing with these extremes isn't easy for the plants of tropical grasslands, but every species has adaptations to help it survive. Many of the grasses go dormant throughout the dry season. They also have the capacity to live on very few nutrients by lowering their transpiration rates, the pace that water evaporates out of the leaves, and they do not experience as much water loss. Grasses in tropical grasslands are also more efficient at water use in general and can adjust their osmotic potential, which is the term to say that they change the nutrient concentrations in their cells to better take up water when there's very little available. To be able to withstand grazing, grasses grow quickly, grow from the bottom up, so newer tissues are not eaten right away, and have lots of their energy stored in their roots, which are not fed on as much as the above ground leaves. Also, to deal with fire, some grasses have rhizomes underground that sprout back easily after a fire. Despite there are few trees, the ones that live here have some key strategies. Some have leaves that fall off during the dry season to conserve water, known as drought deciduous trees, like the baobab. Others are evergreen but are good at conserving water, like acacia. Another limiting factor for trees here is frequent fires. Trees are often vulnerable just before the wet season because they grow new leaves and are already quite stressed. So an intense fire could be too much for them. To help protect against this, mature trees have very thick bark to protect against the fire seed. Also, trees deal with low precipitation by having huge roots that can get water from deep underground and even water storage tissues, bulbs and corms in their trunks. Since trees can often reach the water table, they need fewer physiological adjustments in the dry season than the grasses do. However, this is likely another reason that there are so few trees here because it is really tough for a sapling to grow to a point where the roots are sufficiently large enough to take the advantage of the low water table during the dry season. A final important adaptation to make it in the savanna is defensive chemical against the most numerous danger in the land, herbivores and termites. Termites, for example, can completely consume huge trees, but defensive compounds produced by the tree in both wood and leafy tissue can ward them off. Some trees, especially acacias, have a mutualistic symbiotic relationship with ants. These ants, which live in and on the tree, also defend it from any other predators. And this leads us to animal adaptations. The dry season is a difficult time for animals. The fact that many plants go dormant or die in the dry season also means that there's a lack of food, and of course, they also have reduced access to water. They must either find ways to cope with little food and water, or migrate to new areas. Many animals and birds migrate during the dry season to wetter areas, and they will congregate more heavily around water sources than they would in the wet season. On a similar note, these browsers and grazers manage to coexist by having different preferences when it comes to food and where and when they eat. This is known as niche partitioning. As well, a common behavioral strategy is to burrow underground and stay in the cool earth during the day, like meerkats and many reptiles. Smaller animals may also reside in burrows to hide from predatory birds that do very well in these large open spaces where they have wide, clear views to search for prey, hot air updrafts to help them soar, and essential resting and nesting sites in the trees that are present. And lastly, if we talk about the direct and indirect effects, we can say that general development and agriculture are some of the most harmful practices to the savanna, along with the oil industry, poaching, and unsustainable tourism. To make areas ready to plant on, large fires are started on purpose, which, as mentioned before, can result in short-term nutrients, but over a long period of time leads to less nutrients and high erosion, making this area poor for plant growth in the future. As well, because of lower nutrients in general, larger areas need to be used to get the same yield. Last, irrigation of crops can greatly deplete natural water sources. And the indirect effects are the events that plan to make areas ready to plant on. Large fires are started on purpose, which mentioned before can result in short-term nutrients, but over a long period of time leads to less nutrients. Also, the effect of some of the predators that cause the corruption between species can affect the ecologic balance in the environment. I would like to thank you for listening to me and watching my presentation. I hope you enjoyed. And if you want to learn more about the ecosystem, you can look at my resources here. Thank you again.